to be with you this morning. Today we're going to talk about embracing the gift of limits. And let me tell you what is a very typical scene that is on repeat in our home lately. This includes me on a computer trying to lead a video call, a video meeting with my team, hoping that my 4- and 2-year-old continue to play quietly in the background. They don't. And eventually turns into chaos as the contents of a cup or a diaper or sticky slime spills all over something or someone, and just this inner tension of trying to multitask bubbles over into a cry for help. Daniel, I need you. And I look to see that he's in the middle of a video call. This has been like our 2020 anthem, right? 2020 has been unlike any other year. Each month brings new challenges, forcing us to edit this idea of the new normal. And this season of COVID life has included moments of overwhelm where simple decisions now, like grocery shopping, require much more forethought and energy. As my husband Daniel and I manage working from home with 2 little kids, we find ourselves exhausted in ways that we haven't seen since the newborn days. For friends, life in isolation has deepened a sense of loneliness and anxiety. And as a nation, we're grappling with racial injustice, and in our state where we are experiencing encroaching wildfires, we're experiencing collective loss from losing loved ones to those affected by economic hardship. And in a few months, we are all going to be voting in an election that is bound to bring more tension regardless of where your political affiliations lie. If you feel like you're drowning in overwhelm, there is a reason. It's because 2020 has been a year of overwhelm. Even more recently, in the last couple of weeks, we've been processing some hard news around health issues for my son. And just around the time that my 2-year-old developed a high fever of 104 for 3 days, which ordinarily we'd give Tylenol and call it a cold, except these are not ordinary times. And thankfully he was okay, but it's just been a tense couple of weeks for us. Where are you finding yourself in the midst of overwhelm these days? Are you navigating relationships or anxieties? Is it managing virtual school for your kids? That's like its own sermon. Are you absorbing current events and worry about the future? Here's the thing. 2020 did not introduce overwhelm to us. Many of us have been living lives of minimal margin and maximum stress in ways Jesus never intended us to live. Where Jesus promises a peace that surpasses understanding, our lives have often been marked by worry and envy and frenzy. And I'm talking about myself right here. I'm so grateful that we're going through this series of emotionally healthy spirituality. It feels timely. Last week, Shauna Wisely helped us gain self-awareness of our own brokenness and vulnerability and the freedom that Christ offers living in his grace. Well, that same grace that enables us to admit and identify the areas of pain and brokenness in our own lives is the same needed to recognize our limitations. We can't do everything, nor should we. Limits, when honored, help us flourish. Let me say that again. Whether they are physical, relational, emotional, spiritual, limits, when honored, help us and others flourish. I work for a college campus ministry, and each year our hope is to raise up a community of students, raise up college students who will lead communities of faith on their campus. And at our best, these leadership experiences for students become transformational. They sparking and equipping students to develop a lifelong passion for leadership in their communities and churches. However, when we get trapped into prioritizing outcomes and results at the cost of their own growth and character development, we miss it. Students leave burnt out and dissuaded from desiring to serve beyond college. Not honoring limits is costly. Pete Scazzaro, he's the author of the book this series is based on, he speaks on this. He says, emotionally healthy people understand the limits God has given them. They're marked by contentment and joy. Understanding and respecting our boundaries and limits is one of the most important character qualities and skills leaders need in order to become long-term lovers of God and others. We have a great model of this in Jesus throughout the Gospels, of Jesus honoring his own limits and honoring the limits of others. We get a first glimpse of this early in Jesus' ministry in the Gospel of Mark. This is the biography of Jesus in the first few books of the New Testament. And in Mark chapter 1, verses 29 to 34, we see that Jesus has just begun his public ministry, that he waited 30 years to begin. He is just starting to invite the first few people to follow him, and he's healing people that are in need. And when word gets out that he's healing, crowds upon crowds of people begin searching for Jesus because they want healing. And we pick up in 29, and it says, very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. Simon and his companions went to look for him. When they found him, they exclaimed, "Everyone is looking for you." Jesus replied, "Let us go somewhere else, to the nearby villages, so I can preach there also. That is why I have come." Jesus isn't merely beholden to the needs around him. He has a purpose. He gladly heals, but not at the cost of preaching the good news. And what is this good news? In Luke 4:18 to 19, Jesus preached in the temple and reciting the prophetic words of Isaiah over him. "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me. He has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners, recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." This is the good news he came to preach, that the kingdom of God is now at hand. Jesus had clarity and conviction for his purpose, and that's what guided his decisions. Just a few chapters later in Mark, chapter 4, we find Jesus again with big crowds. And while some of them came for healing, some of them possibly came just to see what the Jesus hype was about, or maybe like get a really good religious sermon they can kind of chew on for a while. What he gave them was an agriculture lesson about a farmer who sows some seeds, and some of it fell on a hard path, others got choked by weeds or taken by birds, and others yielding fruit. And then he walks away. And it's those yearning to know more, to understand, they're the ones that go and follow Jesus, and they ask for more. They ask for understanding, and he gives it to them. He explains the parable to them, and just after that, he affirms their yearning, and he says, "You just got the secret of the kingdom." Jesus gives people freedom to choose more of him. He gives us freedom to choose more of him. In a year when so many commitments have been canceled from my schedule, I'm reminded that deeper intimacy with Jesus still requires intentionality. So how can we honor the gift of limits in our own lives? So I want to share 3 thoughts, not as somebody who's mastered it by any means, but as somebody that is still trying to live into this every day. So the first is that we practice healthy boundaries. Healthy boundaries are when we recognize the individuality of each person, that each person is made in the image of God. Each person is made with inherent worth and value, worthy of dignity and flourishing. And each person is made with their own set of thoughts and feelings, judgments, fears, hopes, and beliefs. When we are able to honor the individuality of others, we give them space to honor the limits in their own lives. We give each other and ourselves freedom to say yes and freedom to say no. And we also let go of this idea that we are God and that we are meant to meet everyone's needs. This can be really hard depending if you've seen this modeled well in your life or not. For me, it's taken a lot of reading and counseling and mentoring to begin to practice healthy boundaries in my life and to root out codependency. And it's still a work in progress. The second is that we have clarity and conviction in our commitments. So years ago, I was coaching this fantastic friend and leader in ministry who was often getting invitations to speak all over town and all over the country, actually. And to the point where it was hindering her own ministry on campus and her own calling in life and her own health. So together we created something called a yes-no grid. And what this was each season, she identified and clarified her priorities, both in ministry and for her personal health and life. And anytime she had a new commitment, like a new opportunity to commit to something, to join something, to do something new, she ran it through her yes-no grid. And it helped her discern what to say no to in order that she could really honor the things she says yes to in her priorities. And that's been a really helpful discipline for my own life as a leader and a mom and person. Pete Scazzaro, in his book, he describes a handful of factors to consider when discerning our own limits in any given season. This can include personality, season of life. Can somebody just say virtual school right now? Life situations and circumstances, emotional, physical, intellectual capacities, wounds from your past, and just your own health needs. As you think about these factors, what would you say are your priorities in this season? Where are you seeking to flourish? And what grid are you using to discern what to say yes to and what to say no to? Lastly, we can embrace the gift of limits by protecting the rhythms of stillness and connection in our day. So much has been upended this year. Exhaustion and isolation are common experiences that we're all navigating and even trying to numb. Seeking moments of stillness with the Lord can become a lifeline to remind you that you are loved by God, that God is with you in this, that God is for you and for your flourishing and for the flourishing of others. And when we are not rooted in God's love and grace and truth, we will let everything else crowd that out in us. I have a friend who's been struggling with this, finding moments of stillness with God. And she was telling me that she realized at the end of every day when her kids were asleep, she was like kind of watching 2 episodes of her favorite show after they went to bed. And she realized if she just watched one and then took that extra 20 minutes to do a devotional with her husband, that was the time that she couldn't find in the day, and that she made that choice. And I always tell my leaders, you cannot pour out to others what you yourself do not have. And so if you want to be the kind of neighbor and the kind of mom or dad or friend or employee or work or CEO, whatever it is, you cannot pour out what it is that you have not filled up for yourself. So where can you find moments of stillness with the Lord in this season of overwhelm? For me, when I was a brand new mom, someone told me it's going to be really hard to have time with Jesus the way it looked like before you had a baby. But every day you wake up and open the shades, what if that was your discipline to welcome the Lord into the day? And that has stayed with me 4 years later. And it's like just a small way I've tried to find connection with the Lord in every morning. In addition to stillness with the Lord, what would it look like to protect rhythms of meaningful connection in your day? For some, the unspoken impact of COVID has just been this decreased connection, human connection, and this increase of loneliness. Vivek Murthy, he's the former US Surgeon General. He wrote the book, Together, the Healing Power of Human Connection in a Sometimes Lonely World. He describes loneliness not as this like dowdy, sad person in the middle of in the corner of a room, but it can look like anger. Loneliness can look like isolation, pulling away. It can look like irritability and depression. But he, in his research, said that just spending 15 minutes a day in a meaningful, distraction-free conversation, connection with someone that you love and trust, that brings you joy, can shift that towards hope. For me in this season at Midtown, I have really enjoyed being in a virtual home group. So we do the home-to-home groups in person and virtually. And I love getting to know these other women in my virtual group. And it has become like a cherished place of connection for me. How might pursuing rhythms of stillness with the Lord and meaningful connection with others bring more health in the area of limits in your own life? So how can we honor the gift of limits in our lives? We can practice healthy boundaries. We can have clarity and confidence in our commitments and pursue rhythms of stillness and meaningful connection. Even in the last few weeks as I've been preparing for this, and definitely at moments thought like, why am I speaking on this? This idea is so hard. But it has actually helped, it has helped me live into limits better, even as I've been thinking a lot about this idea. And so recently I was in a team meeting and I shared some feedback, and I left the meeting wondering how the other person received it. And rather than backpedal or overly manage their emotions around it, I remember just thinking, I'm going to give them space. I'm going to give them space and let them process when they're ready. And we did. More recently in conversations where I've been in a few conversations where there has just been sharp disagreement in our perspective around cultural events and what's happening in our world. And I'm trying to learn to ask better questions and to seek understanding first than to cast quick judgments. I have even said no to a few things that people have asked of me in order to create more margin in our family's life and honor my commitments. And saying no shouldn't feel so. Someone said like no is a complete sentence. But that is something I have not fully understood yet. But I'm so grateful that I felt the freedom and the grace to be able to ask for more margin. And each of these actually have been really hard. I'm a people pleaser. I like meeting needs. But in honoring healthy boundaries and my own limits, I was able to feel these tensions of people pleasing and need meeting and enabling come to the surface. And it's there that I was able to process that with God and let God do the transforming work in my own heart. This is why limits are important. They invite us to live into our capacities and let God be God over all. When we embrace the gift of limits, we honor God, we honor each other, and we honor ourselves. And it is there indeed that we become long-term lovers of God and others. One day, be it years from now, we are going to look back at 2020. We might have a twitch when we do, but we are going to look back at 2020 and the effect it had on us. We will testify to the struggle, to the challenges, and to the creativity birthed out of it. Out of this year. And when you think of your future self, what do you hope to look back on as the anchors that helped you through this year? And in what ways can honoring limits now anchor you in the purposes that God has for you in this season? Let me pray for us. God, I'm so grateful that you have given us limits. I'm grateful that our bodies need sleep. I'm grateful that we need connection with you and with others. And I'm grateful, God, that you have modeled this for us. You have modeled healthy, what it looks like to honor limits in ourselves and in others. God, I pray that we would not be beholden to anything other than what you have for us, and that you would give us the wisdom to create boundaries around our lives so that we can honor those things. And I just pray for grace. I pray for grace in this season of messiness. God, for some of us that are like just hanging on, collapsing at the end of the day, God, would you be the grace that breathes new life into us each morning? We love you and we need you, and we seek you.